The neon sign for the Desert Rose Motel flickered with a low, wet hum, casting a sickly pink glow over the cracked asphalt. It was 2:14 a.m. on a desolate stretch of Route 66 in New Mexico. Marcus was driving cross-country, his eyes burning from 12 hours behind the wheel. The motel looked like a relic of the 1970s, decaying silently under the desert sky. Desperate for sleep, he pulled in. The parking lot was empty save for a rusted pickup truck on cinder blocks. The air felt heavy, smelling faintly of ozone and old copper. Marcus walked into the lobby. A bell chimed weakly. Behind the bulletproof glass sat an old man with milky, unblinking eyes. Without a word, the man slid a tarnished brass key for room 114 across the counter. The key felt freezing cold. Marcus muttered a thanks and walked down the outdoor walkway. The silence of the desert was absolute, broken only by the scraping of his boots. He unlocked the door to room 114. The interior smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap floral air freshener, masking something darker. He locked the deadbolt, threw his duffel bag on the saggy mattress, and collapsed. The television set in the corner was a heavy, old-fashioned tube TV. Marcus didn't bother turning it on. He just wanted to drift into oblivion. As he closed his eyes, a strange sound began. It was a rhythmic, wet scraping noise coming from directly beneath his bed. Scritch. Slide. Scritch. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound stopped. He held his breath, telling himself it was just desert rats in the floorboards. He forced himself to relax, closing his eyes again. 10 minutes passed. Then, the television screen suddenly crackled to life with static. The loud bzzzzzzzzz shattered the silence. Marcus jumped up, grabbing the remote to turn it off. The power button did nothing. The static shifted, swirling into a grainy, black and white image of a motel room. Marcus gasped. The room on the screen was room 114. He could see the back of his own head on the television. The camera angle was coming from the air vent directly above him. Panic surged through him like liquid ice. He stared at the screen, paralyzed. On the television feed, he watched the vent cover above his bed slowly slide open. A dark, gelatinous liquid began to drip down onto his pillow. Marcus whipped his head up to look at the actual ceiling. The vent was perfectly closed. Dry. He looked back at the TV. On the screen, a pair of wide, human eyes were now staring down from inside the dark vent, locked onto him. The television speaker hissed, "Don't look up." Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and lunged for the front door. He grabbed the deadbolt and twisted it. It wouldn't budge. The metal knob was burning hot to the touch, blistering his skin. He screamed, spinning around. The room on the TV screen was now completely empty, but the camera was moving, descending from the ceiling. On the screen, the perspective was now walking towards the bathroom. Marcus looked toward his actual bathroom door. It was cracked open. A wet, naked foot stepped out into the room. The entity was impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and bent at unnatural angles. It didn't have a face, just a smooth expanse of pale skin stretched over a jaw that unhinged, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It let out a sound like a tearing bedsheet. Marcus threw his weight against the window, shattering the glass with his shoulder. He tumbled out onto the sharp gravel of the parking lot, bleeding and screaming. He scrambled into his car, turned the ignition, and slammed on the gas, never looking back at room 114. The police later investigated the Desert Rose Motel. They found the lobby abandoned, the old man nowhere to be seen. When they entered room 114, they found Marcus's duffel bag untouched. However, inside the ceiling crawlspace, they discovered a hidden chamber lined with old Polaroids of sleeping guests spanning decades. Beneath the floorboards of the bed, the wood was deeply scored with fingernail scratches. Marcus survived, but he never sleeps without a light on, and he never, ever stays in a motel room on the first floor. The dread from the Desert Rose Motel lingered in the air like heavy humidity, but the highway stretched onward, offering no comfort, only a different kind of darkness. 2 states over, on a forgotten bypass just outside of a dying Georgia coal town, the neon sign for the Pinecrest Motor Lodge buzzed with a dull, sickening green glow. Chloe and her brother, Sam, pulled their sputtering station wagon into the gravel lot. They had been driving since dawn, fleeing a broken home with nothing but $300 and a trunk full of clothes. The Pinecrest looked entirely abandoned, surrounded by towering, oppressive pine trees that seemed to crowd the property, blocking out the starlight. The air was thick, suffocating, and smelled intensely of damp earth and rotting wood. The night manager didn't ask for ID. He didn't even ask for their names. He was a hulking, silent man wearing a grease-stained trucker hat pulled low, shadowing his face entirely. He simply took their $30 cash payment and handed Sam a heavy, rusted iron key labeled Room 6. His fingers were stained a deep, unnatural black, as if he had been digging in wet soil with his bare hands. Room 6 sat at the very end of the motel strip, buried deep in the shadow of the tree line. When Sam unlocked the door, a wave of freezing, stagnant air rushed out to meet them. The room's layout was basic: 2 twin beds with faded patchwork quilts, a laminate dresser, and a heavy, oval mirror bolted to the wall opposite the beds. The mirror was old, its silver backing peeling and distorted. "This place gives me the creeps," Chloe whispered, tossing her backpack onto the bed closest to the door. "It's just for one night," Sam replied, trying to sound brave, though his voice shook slightly. He walked over to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face. Chloe sat on her bed, staring at the oval mirror. In the warped glass, her reflection looked strange, stretched, pale, and somehow disconnected from her actual movements. She blinked rapidly, rubbing her eyes. The distortion in the glass seemed to ripple, like a stone dropped into a still pond. She shook her head, blaming it on road fatigue. From the bathroom, the sound of running water suddenly stopped. Sam walked out, looking pale. "Hey, Chloe, did you turn off the main lights?" Chloe looked around. The room had grown significantly darker. The green glow from the outside neon sign was the only illumination left. "I didn't touch anything," Chloe said, her heart skipping a beat. Sam reached for the lamp beside his bed, clicking the switch repeatedly. Nothing happened. The bulb must be dead. He walked over to the front door to check the main switch. As he did, Chloe glanced back at the mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. In the reflection, Sam was still standing by the bathroom door. But in reality, he was across the room. "Sam!" Chloe choked out, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Don't move." "What's wrong?" Sam asked, his hand pausing on the wall switch. In the mirror, the reflection of Sam slowly turned its head toward Chloe. It smiled. It was a wide, jagged grin that stretched far too wide for a human face, revealing gums that were completely black. The reflection raised a finger to its lips. "Shush." Chloe scrambled backward on her bed, her back hitting the headboard. "Sam, look at the mirror. Look at the mirror right now." Sam spun around, facing the glass. The moment his real eyes locked onto the reflection, the figure inside the mirror stopped smiling. Its expression twisted into pure, unadulterated rage. It slammed both hands against the inside of the glass. A loud, booming thud echoed through the physical room. The glass cracked. A thin spiderweb of fractures spread across the center of the mirror. "What the hell is that?" Sam screamed, drawing back. From the cracks in the mirror, a dark, viscous liquid, the same black mud that had covered the manager's fingers, began to ooze outward, dripping down the wall and onto the carpet. The smell of rotting leaves and stagnant swamp water filled the room, suddenly overpowering. Inside the mirror, the reflection of the room was changing. The twin beds in the glass were covered in dirt and dead leaves. And standing behind the reflection of Sam was a tall, skeletal figure woven entirely out of rotted wood and weeping willow branches. Its eyes were 2 hollow cavities burning with a faint, malevolent green embers. It reached its wooden arms forward, wrapping them around the reflection's neck. In the real room, Sam suddenly gasped, clutching his throat. He fell to his knees, his eyes bulging as invisible pressure choked the air from his lungs. "Sam!" Chloe shrieked. She lunged off the bed, grabbing a heavy ceramic ashtray from the nightstand. She swung it with all her might, smashing it directly into the center of the mirror. The glass shattered completely, raining sharp shards onto the floor. The moment the mirror broke, Sam collapsed onto the floor, coughing violently, drawing in ragged breaths. The invisible grip on his throat vanished. But they weren't safe. The black mud pooling on the carpet began to bubble. From the empty, wooden frame where the mirror had been, a hand made of twisted, wet roots slowly reached out into the real world, gripping the drywall. "Get out! Out!" Sam yelled, dragging himself up by the doorframe. Chloe didn't look back. She grabbed Sam's jacket, hauling him toward the door. They threw the deadbolt open and burst out into the cool night air. Behind them, a low, guttural roar echoed from inside room 6, a sound like a falling tree crushing everything in its path. They sprinted to their car, the gravel cutting into Chloe's bare feet. Sam threw himself into the driver's seat, cranking the engine. It sputtered, whined, and then roared to life. He slammed the car into reverse just as the door to room 6 was completely ripped off its hinges from the inside. Through the windshield, Chloe saw the night manager standing in the middle of the parking lot. He wasn't trying to stop them. He was just watching, his face still shadowed, lifting his mud-stained hand in a slow, chilling wave. They drove for 3 hours without stopping, only pulling over when the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in safe, warm oranges and yellows. When they checked the car in the daylight, Chloe noticed something that made her blood run cold. Pressed firmly against the inside of the muddy rear windshield was the distinct, perfect print of a skeletal, wooden hand. They never spoke of the Pinecrest Motor Lodge again, but Chloe removed every mirror from her apartment, unable to shake the feeling that something on the other side was still waiting for her to look. The final stop was a place that didn't appear on any modern maps. Deep within the rain-drenched coastal forests of the Pacific Northwest, nestled along an abandoned logging route, stood the Starlight Rest Cabin Motel. Ryan was a seasoned urban explorer and travel vlogger who prided himself on finding places untouched by time. He had tracked down the coordinates of this long-forgotten 1950s motor court from an anonymous tip on a dark web forum. The user had written only one sentence: "Go to room 9, press record, and don't turn off the camera." When Ryan arrived at midnight, the coastal fog was so dense it swallowed the headlights of his Jeep. The motel was a crescent-shaped row of decayed wooden cabins, wrapped in thick blankets of green moss. It looked dead, but as Ryan approached the office, the front door swung open on a creaking hinge. No one was inside. On the desk lay a single rusty key with a faded plastic tag, 9. He took the key, stepped over the threshold of cabin 9, and flipped the power switch on his high-end video camera. "All right, guys," Ryan whispered into his microphone, his voice echoing in the damp, claustrophobic space. "We are inside room 9 of the Starlight Rest. The air in here is freezing, and it smells like old paper and copper. Let's see what the hype is about." The cabin was frozen in time. A rotary telephone sat on the nightstand. A moth-eaten wool blanket was neatly tucked into a sagging mattress. Ryan panned the camera around, checking the corners for anything unusual. Everything seemed completely normal, until he looked at the camera's digital viewfinder. Through his naked eye, the room was empty. But on the camera screen, a man was sitting perfectly upright on the edge of the bed. Ryan lowered the camera. The bed was empty. He raised the camera back to his eye. On the screen, the man was there. He was wearing a faded 1950s business suit, his head bowed forward, his hands resting flat on his knees. "What the hell?" Ryan muttered, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. He stepped closer, keeping the camera locked on the figure. On the screen, the man slowly lifted his head. His face was a horrific sight. Where his eyes and mouth should have been, there were only smooth, seamless patches of pale skin, as if his features had been erased. Yet, a muffled, distorted voice emanated from the camera's audio monitor, feeding directly into Ryan's headphones. "It's time for the checkout inspection," the voice rasped through the static. Suddenly, the rotary phone on the nightstand began to ring. The shrill, mechanical bring shattered the silence of the cabin. Ryan jumped, dropping his flashlight. It rolled under the bed, casting long, erratic shadows across the floorboards. Ryan's instincts told him to run, but the viral potential of the footage kept his feet glued to the floor. He pointed the camera at the ringing phone. On the screen, the faceless man was now standing right next to the nightstand. He picked up the heavy black receiver and held it out toward Ryan. In the real world, the receiver lifted into the air by itself, hovering in the empty space. "It's for you," the voice echoed directly inside Ryan's headphones, bypassing the camera entirely. Trembling, Ryan reached out and took the floating receiver. He pressed it to his ear. At first, there was only the sound of roaring ocean waves and deep, ragged breathing. Then, a voice spoke. It wasn't the faceless man. It was Ryan's own voice, sounding terrified, screaming at the top of his lungs. "He's behind you. Look at the screen. Look at the screen." Ryan slammed the receiver down and threw his eyes back to the camera viewfinder. On the screen, the faceless man was no longer by the phone. He was standing directly behind Ryan, his elongated, pale arms wrapped tightly around Ryan's neck. Ryan felt a sudden, suffocating pressure choke off his airway in the real world. He gasped for air, dropping the camera. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack, the lens pointing upward toward the ceiling. Lying paralyzed on the floor, Ryan could see the camera's flipped-out viewfinder. On the screen, the faceless man was kneeling over his body, pressing his featureless face down against Ryan's mouth. Ryan could feel a freezing, unnatural vacuum pulling the very breath, the very life, out of his lungs. His vision began to blur into blackness. With his last ounce of strength, he kicked the camera, knocking it under the bed into the shadows. 3 weeks later, Ryan's Jeep was found abandoned on the logging road. The police searched the Starlight Rest Cabin Motel, but found no trace of the missing vlogger. The case remained a mystery until an anonymous user uploaded a single, unedited video file to the internet. The footage shows a camera lying under a motel bed, recording the empty room. Suddenly, a pair of boots enters the frame. A man picks up the camera. He turns the lens toward his own face. It is Ryan. He looks perfectly healthy, but his expression is entirely vacant. He smiles a hollow, robotic smile at the camera, his eyes completely glassed over. "Checkout is complete," Ryan says to the lens, his voice perfectly clear. The room is ready for the next guest. He turns off the camera, leaving nothing but static. Hit like and subscribe now.